So as we stand together in this space that reminds us that we're all connected always. We're connected at the point of our divinity, that point at which God is always present within us, always present as us. We're grateful for this presence, grateful this presence in this room and in our lives. And from this place of gratitude, we enter into another place of openness and a place of receptivity, prepared to learn, to grow, to serve. And we say thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Last week, when I talked about how Imelda Shankman was just like, you have a problem, handle it, and that's kind of potentially harsh, has a harsh feel to it when we think, well, you got a problem, take care of it. And what I really meant to say, now this is really bad when I'm explaining myself a week later as we start something else. But what I really meant to say is that Imelda tried to tell us that we have the opportunity and the potential to solve our problems, and that complaining about our problems was not part of that potential. Sitting there, and I would add to that, as we move through this morning, that beating ourselves up about an issue is not part of solving the problem. So we're going to talk about taking care of ourselves. And when we think about that, we'll think a little bit about what we saw last week. And what we saw last week, the idea that, remember the old Eric Butterworth idea that we're all waves. And what a new suggestion is that instead of that we are all waves, that we really are all water. We just happen to present as a wave. We have to present as this right here for some period of time as we're alive. But the stuff of us is the water. And that means the stuff of us is God. That's the stuff of us. It's impossible, if we suggest that we are children of God, that we're made up of anything else. So when we think about where we go from being the wave, the next thing or idea that's presented is from Jesus, who said, "You're the light of the world." And one of the most important parts of that for me is that each one of us is a light in the world that can only be from us. No one else ever existed like you. No one ever will exist like you. And so as the light of the world, you're going to be able to illuminate parts of the world that no one else can. Not just parts of the world, but a world. Your worldview that you use to illuminate is only from you. No one else can do that. But we're going to talk a little bit today about the fact that maybe we're borrowing light from other people and trying to shine somebody else's light and not ours. So this is Imelda Shanklin, and she talked to us about the idea that we are a child of God. But the biggest thing she told us about is our mind is our life. The life that we show up with is the light that originates in our mind. And when she talks about mind, she's really talking about a mind that's connected to God mind. We'll talk more about that right after Thanksgiving. We'll talk about how we might connect with that when I'm here again. So we could go ahead and move on. And this was a little controversial. People got a little bit nervous about the whole idea that we are really all divine. And it's not just that we are here as human beings and then we're going to go off and get to be all spiritual or all divine. The idea from Father Keating is that's just what we are. And I think one of the things I discovered when I heard somebody talk last week after my talk was what I discovered was it's really about remembering. Because when you look at little kids, they know exactly who they are. They know exactly who they are and what they are until we yell at them and do things to make them into something that's more like what we want them to be or what we think they ought to be. Boy, we're going to talk a lot about that here before we're done. But the whole idea of discovering your divinity is really a rediscovery, a process of rediscovery. We'll move on. So in the Bible tells us that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. We also hear that in everything do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I ask you to consider this question. Do you really think that God is telling the folks in Leviticus that they should treat their neighbors the way they treat themselves? Now, maybe 2,000 years ago, people were a whole lot nicer to themselves than they are nowadays. I'm not real sure. But the fact of the matter is that most of us would go to jail or get ourselves beaten up if we talk to our neighbors the way we talk to ourselves. Oh, goodness. We do not respect ourselves in the same fashion that we respect our neighbors. So the whole golden rule thing needs to be adjusted for us first and talk about our own compassion and our own ability to show love to ourselves. Let's go to the next. So this is from somebody named David. Everybody here heard of David Hayward, the Naked Pastor? He's wonderful. He's a cartoonist, and he was a Baptist minister who, after 20 some odd years, just couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it anymore. And so he began to express who and what Jesus was, who and what God was to him, not who the church told him he needed to tell people about. He's really big on helping us understand our no, that's not true. I was going to say understand our transgender friends, and what David is real quick to let us know is that understanding our transgender gay friends or any of our friends really doesn't matter. And the same thing is true for us. Now, we may sit on a therapist's couch and learn stuff about ourselves, but it's not just about learning about ourselves. We can start with the idea of learning to love ourselves before we ever even know ourselves. That whole self-knowledge thing may not even be necessary. Certainly not as necessary as our psychology friends would like us to think. What if you treat yourself as you would treat a child, or how you would treat a friend? We'll talk more about that in a minute. But the idea that Jesus didn't say the first love should be God, the first love should be you. And why would that be after all we talked about last week? We talked about you're the light of the world. We talked about you're a child of God. If all of those things are true, then the first love should be yourself, this very special self that no one else ever can be. And we'll do the next one here. There are some inherent or implied ideas about how we ought to treat ourselves. We all not have one Father. That's not God created us. But the one I love the most is from Hillel. And he says, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. And that's the whole Torah. That's this whole books of the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Hillel says that's all that really matters. In all that you read is what's hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. And so that would suggest that we really need to not do things that are hateful to ourselves. And then we move on to our neighbors. The Dalai Lama said that compassion is a state of wishing that the object of our compassion be free of suffering. And that begins with us. And then we move on from us into another way, into the embrace of others. Now, the big deal with that for me is that where we go with the idea of this, self-compassion is that we really kind of got to dig through. We got to dig through the things, not necessarily knowing ourselves, but dig through the stuff that we picked up from our preachers, teachers, and parents. Those things that make up what Charles Fillmore called that our personality, and what Imelda Shanklin talked about as being this part of us that is changeable and not permanent. Your God self is permanent. That personality, that thing that you built by yourself, and you built it based upon things people said, but not necessarily directly to you. I asked my wife a question about doing math, and my sisters always said, well, I just can't do math. And there was an implication that was a girl thing, that girls just really can't do math. And I talked to my wife about that, and she said, well, I was more of a tomboy, and so I never caught that idea, but she knew exactly what I was talking about. That idea, and I said, well, who told you that? And she said, I have no idea. It just showed up. That's where part of our problem is. Now, Kristen Neff is a researcher at University of Texas here in Austin. She's written 2 books about compassion. That second book on that list is Fierce Self-Compassion. And I met Kristen at a program just behind here a little bit here in this space. And then we went on a retreat together. And I just want to share a couple of things about her. She is the self-compassion queen of the world right now. Her research is cited everywhere by anybody interested in self-compassion. She teaches people to become self-compassion teachers. But some of the interesting things you'll read about in her books, one is that she learned from her to be able to love her father-in-law through her own self-compassion. And it was a real challenge to do that, because one of the first things he said to her when he met her was, don't let anybody talk you into getting rid of your mustache. And now, if you think of yourself as a woman who wants to be attractive, which of course is one of the rules, because you are born to be attractive or not. And if you're not attractive, then you can't, no, wait a minute. That's the story that we've been told about who women are and what they are. And she was able to still love this guy who talked about her mustache, because we're supposed to ignore those things. She's beautiful, a beautiful, beautiful young woman at the time. But the other story I wanted to mention just briefly is that at a retreat that I went to, where she was at the retreat, some things happened and I was triggered, and I remembered things that had happened to me or that I had caused to happen. It was a variety of things all jumbled up in one place. And it was something that was 35 years old. And 35 years old, and I just was a jumbled up mess in a chair. And she wasn't running the retreat. She was there to learn. She was just a participant, just like me. And she asked the leaders if she could spend a little time talking to me. And within 5 minutes, I had better results than I'd had in thousands of hours of therapy. Because what she went to was not what the hell caused this problem. She didn't go to who was shooting at who, and who did this and who did that, and who died and who didn't die, who got injured, and all of those things that go into stuff that we have names for, survivor guilt and all of that. What she went to directly was, how would someone else take care of you? Now you take care of yourself. What would you say if it was your friend who was the jumbled up mess on the floor crying? How would you talk to them? And in 5 minutes, and I honestly can say that I've not had that kind of triggering in 15 years. It's just amazing, because this is the power that we get when we consider self-compassion. A couple of issues that we have with that. One is that we've got to notice that we're suffering. Sometimes we've been talking crap to ourselves so long, we don't even notice it. We don't even notice that we're doing it, because we're not mindful of how we treat ourselves. We also get this idea that maybe we're the only one on earth that has this problem. The only person on earth. Now, I'm sure each one of you have your own individual problems, but I'll bet you money that if we had a conversation, you would eventually begin to have the idea that we've kind of got some similarities going on here, and that we're all not all new or not all unique. In fact, in a 12-step program, I've been told many, many times that I suffered from terminal uniqueness. And that terminal uniqueness was something that made the program unworkable for me until I let go, of that. So let's move on to the next slide here. The idea now, you may not have heard these words directly, but many of us picked up on these ideas and we tucked those ideas away. Now there may be a lot of other ideas that you picked up from somewhere, someplace. Let's just move on to the next. Lord knows we don't want to focus on that, but this is a big one for us right here. When we heard those words, we took those words from our preachers, parents, and teachers, and we took those words and we took those expectations of those words and we built our own little prison. It may be a box. You may think I'm in the box, or you may think that you're stuck in some other fashion. Like I made the joke about how all women are expected to be beautiful and attentive to men, and we go through a whole long list of things. Now, I don't know that we do that with younger women nowadays, but older women certainly have been stuck with those expectations. In fact, a wonderful cartoon that the Naked Pastor has is he presents to this mother and father and says, "Oh, welcome this wonderful object into your life." And it's a very sad statement. It's a very sad statement, and none of us think that way until our children, our girl children, grow up and realize how often that's the space that they occupy, not just in other people's minds, but in their own. So the goal for us is to begin to let go of those expectations that are keeping us, or that are keeping us stuck. And the ways this shows up as an example is somebody's on a diet. You're on a diet and you decide that maybe a donut would be a good idea this morning. By the afternoon, you're building into some shame, blame, and this entire game about what a terrible, horrible person you are. And in that space, you may even want another donut, or you may want a pizza, or you may want something else that's not supportive of your diet. And what happens to us then is our self-talk. We hear the negative self-talk going on. We say, okay, what we need is positive self-talk. And what that might really be is, can we back up from this? I don't know. What that might really be is an effort. What that might really be is an effort that we have to just stop the pain, to stop that feeling that we're having over the donut, or the feeling we're having. One example that I read from a guy named Chris Germer, who wrote a book on mindfulness, self-compassion. He says, think about this. Think about, you get upset with your daughter and you yell at your daughter, and then your husband is mad at you for yelling at your daughter. And now you have a choice. You can holler back at your husband, which that may happen. But what's really going on as you holler back at your husband is an effort to point at him for being at fault while you're beating up on yourself because you've stepped into a space you didn't want to be in. Instead of saying, God, I love my daughter more than I love anything. My daughter's very important to me. Not real sure why I stepped over the line. But I've talked to my other friends and they've had that same experience. There are ways that we can talk to ourselves, not where we're making an excuse, but we're attempting to deal with a wound that we inflicted on ourselves. When we think about a wound, if you cut your finger, what are you going to do? You're going to clean it. You're going to stop the bleeding. You're going to do all the things you can to make that finger heal. But what if it's an emotional wound that you've inflicted on yourself, or an emotional wound that somebody else has inflicted on? We don't have the tools. We don't have a first aid kit. And the tool is self-love. The tools are self-love, not self-esteem. Self-esteem says you got to feel good about yourself. And what we're looking for is not to feel good. We're looking to not have suffering. You've all heard the idea that pain is going to happen and the suffering is optional. The idea that pain times resistance equals suffering. So what we resist persists. The bumper sticker says that what we resist persists. And that is really the truth. I mentioned it last week. The idea that someone like me, who can wake up in the middle of the night and end up wanting to call 911 because I'm having a panic attack, can stop that behavior by actually noticing the anxiety, the feelings of the anxiety, accepting them. We all have heard the story about let go and let God. We make all kinds of ways that we're going to allow it to do that, but we don't. We say it, but we don't do it, because it is when we do it is that we're actually surrendering to the pain. Ooh. We're surrendering to that emotional pain. I think I mentioned something about how my sisters thought I didn't care about my father because I felt joy through his funeral, my first memorial service that I ever did as a minister. It wasn't that I was laughing and saying what a wonderful time I was having, but I was actually allowed myself to experience the loss and the love that I had rather than fighting it. Imagine if it's okay to cry. Imagine if it's okay to say, I feel awful about this situation. I feel pain. And that it's okay to feel pain. Pain is a part of life. The more we fight it and we come up with, in unity, we have all kinds of stuff that we can do. You know, we have affirmations. We come in with positive affirmations. Oh my God, I feel bad. So we put some positive affirmations on. We say words that are meant to make us stop hurting. Yet the more we fight the hurt, the longer the hurt will last, and it becomes suffering. Let's move on to the next one. And this is about ourselves. This is from a guy named David White. And I'm actually going to read the entire poem. And for those of you who are here, it's called Admit. You can get it online. And it's from a book called Still Possible. Admit your distant love affair is with yourself, and that no one can play harder to get. The unwritten letters, the plays for time, the heartbreak over never being properly answered, that coy look of false seduction in the mirror, or that hard look to hide what should not be hidden. The invitation to undoing and to allowing yourself to want at last what you feel you never deserved. The fervent wish to come closer, and the loving word of understanding you say to yourself when you finally admit to it all. The only declaration that counts. The last relationship you will ever have in your life is with yourself. When you die, when you take your last breath, there will be people there. But you will cross over through that thin space, through that liminal space. You will cross over. And in fact, if you've been with people as they die, in the days before they die, they cross over back and forth, back. And what they're working on is that self. They're going into themselves And if you've never had that relationship, it's very difficult. I've watched people appear to have nightmares, and I've also watched people just appear to be having a great time. You wouldn't think so, but they're having a great time going off real close to that undiscovered country that Shakespeare talked about. Not in a space of suffering, but in a space of openness and receptivity to what's coming next. Because they have that relationship with themselves. And what we really find out is, I was talking earlier today about the idea that, gosh, it's so weird how people end up in relationships that last. People who don't seem to be matched up at all. And people who seem to be matched up perfectly, their relationships don't seem to last. And what I think, and the reason that I think it's so difficult is that what I think is going on is that people who cannot have a relationship with themselves have really impossible time having a relationship with anyone else. Now, there are people in relationship who are not really in relationship with each other. They just hang out in the same space. But the relationship that we all long for, that soul relationship, comes when the people within the relationship know themselves. So how would you treat a friend in a car wreck? How do you treat that friend? Do you come up and say, "What did you do?" No, that's not what we would do. I remember my daughter had a car accident, totally her fault, totally her fault. She just drove out, somebody drove into her. And the first thing she did was just start telling me about how she was such a terrible driver. And all I wanted to do was hold her and make sure, because I was concerned how she was. And yet for her, it was all about blame. It was all about her fault that she ruined her new car. That's not how we treat someone else, but that's how we treat ourselves. And it's mindfulness that there's a suffering going on and that we're in a shared human experience. When you look at that traffic jam, and as people travel around here in Austin, they're going to see traffic jams. And guess what? Everybody's in a traffic jam. Everybody's going to be in a traffic jam today in Austin, Texas. It's going to happen. That's how it's going to be. And that shared experience will simply be a part of it. And guess how we can make that traffic a worse experience? By fussing and cussing about the traffic, because there's nothing you can do about it. You take the pain of the traffic and turn it into suffering. And that's what we do. Responding with feelings of care and concern for ourselves. We're just not doing that. That's where we've got to go. That's where we've got to go. So let's move on to the next slide. I think it's because I wanted to mention the idea about what self-compassion is not. I got the big ones for me are on the pictures there. There's a whole lot of stuff about self-pity, self-indulgence, and all that. But the big one for me is finding somebody to blame. Got to find somebody to blame. And I really would prefer finding somebody to blame other than myself. It usually is the most comfortable space for me to go to. But if I can't find anybody else, I'll blame it on myself, because somebody's got to be at fault. There's always these rules about somebody has to be at fault. I make myself a victim. That's how I do that. Another way I do that is that you're at fault and you make me a victim. I get to be I get something out of being that victim. And then the idea that sometimes people get the idea that self-care and self-compassion has to do with things that make us feel good. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be ice cream. Bluebell ice cream certainly does have that potential to make us feel good. I used to work in the business of nutrition and helping people lose weight. And, the things I always said is that if we had celebrated birthdays with broccoli and a candle, we would be in a whole lot different place now than since we celebrated with cake and ice cream. Something about us, though, that sugar and fat and all that stuff makes us feel better for a few minutes. But it's just like that cut. It's just like that cut. Is it going to give us a long-term improvement? If we're talking to a friend, some friends may say, well, here, I brought ice cream for you. I brought wine for you. I brought, but what we really want to do is to encourage our friends to take care of themselves in healthy ways. Let's go out for a walk. Let's go out for a bike ride. All the things that we know would be supportive of their health and their lives rather than those things that might have a negative impact. Some say we never had bluebell ice cream, but we consider what we're doing that when we have that. So what this is all about to me is that we are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. And in order to be the light of the world, you need to be able to show the light that is your light, not someone else's, not a light through the lens of somebody else's expectations. Don't stay closed up in those somebody else's expectations of yourself, and don't beat yourself up. Then we move from not beating ourselves up to that place of actually loving ourselves, caring for ourselves, and we care for ourselves in ways that keep us alive so that we can keep shining those lights. Those are things that's part of that whole idea of being healthy, is about shining a light around the world for as long as we possibly can. I mentioned that last week, that whole idea that I go into a nursing home with people who just feel like they're done. And I shared that I felt that way when I retired, when I stopped being in the pulpit, and I said, okay, I'm done. And the truth of the matter is, Social Security plans on paying me for another 15 years. So that means that I ought to keep shining a light for 15 years, not just sitting in my house watching TV and petting my dog. My dog needs light, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Let's move on to the next one. And where we really go with this is the idea that, back to that idea that your first love, the first care is for yourself, is truly loving yourself. So let's go into a space of, we can go to the next one, go into a space of relaxation. How on earth are we going to relax? The first thing we do is just know that you're sitting in a chair and you're supported. You don't really have to do anything. Just sit in that chair. I want you to test something though for me. As we go into this space, I want you to put your hands out in front of you and tighten your fist, just as tight as you can. Just hold it tight, 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 tight. Now I want you to put your hands over your heart. It's impossible to tense your hands over your heart. That's an expression of love. It's an expression of care. As a child was crying in a room for no reason, we just hold it. Now, sometimes in a space like in a restaurant or an office, you may not be able to get away with this. But notice how it feels. And you could do it in traffic. I can just rest your hands a minute. I want to introduce something here as we go into this space of quiet for a moment. And that's something about, we have a real hard time noticing our emotions. We have a hard time noticing things that are going on in our bodies. We notice that when we start talking about emotions, we don't have a whole lot of words. I'm mad. Are you mad or are you afraid? How often do you say you're afraid? Mad feels more normal or more like what other people want to do. So we're going to do something called social noting. And what we're going to pay attention to is not those emotions of sad, mad, angry. We're going to notice your body. And as you sit, notice, and you can say it out loud, what's going on in your body. So we begin by noticing our breath as we breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in And breathe out. And notice. Notice things, feelings that may be going on in your body. Pressure. Tension. As you notice a feeling, announce it. Tension. Pressure. Relaxation. Don't know. Release. Relaxation. Now, as we begin to come back to this room, this was an experiment. This was a test. This is a way of beginning to consider how we notice what's going on. It's called mindfulness. And as you return to the room and begin to look around, look at me, understand that it is that ability to notice without judgment, not saying, oh, crap, I feel something terrible. It's that noticing. Because the more you judge it, the more you put a bad label on that tension, the more tension you will have. Research has shown we can do this with back pain. People with back pain try to get rid of their back pain, and what they end up doing is causing more tension in their back than they had when they started, and so they have more pain because they're fighting to get it to relax. And yet if they simply noticed it and let it go, remember, let go and let God, notice and let it go, it doesn't take over your body. And the same is true of any emotion that we have. When I fight my anxiety, I stay anxious. When I just let my anxiety show up and say, there it is, comes and goes. Today's the day. Come to visit. It doesn't hang around. So mindfulness is about noticing what's going on in our emotions, our bodies, everything that's going on in our lives, and not judging it, not fighting it. Because what do we do? What do? We try to hang on to what we like and get rid of what we don't. And sometimes that is how we use denials and affirmations. We try to deny something we don't like, and we try to affirm something we like, and it ends up being that fight rather than loving ourselves no matter what. I'm a guy with anxiety. I'm a guy periodically with depression. Take some medication, talk to doctors. I do stuff. But the truth of it is just noting today, this morning, just might be a depression morning. And it's okay. It's okay. Because I love me. So when we talk about a question today, the question for me is what kind of first aid do you use when you're having those emotional hurts? So as we move into that. I don't know if we do that on Zoom. I forget how this works. By the way, that's my wife. I just had to tell you about that because we shouldn't have been married. She's a lawyer. She's a lawyer and she used the legal pad. She went to a therapist who says, I want you to figure out all of the things that you don't want to have in a relationship. And so there's some magical thing that happened because I think I had every single one on the list. And it was about a half of a legal, not just the sheet of legal paper. I'm talking about page after page after page, ex-wife, children, all the things that can make for a challenging relationship. And that was 25 years ago. And here we are.
Where is she?
Huh? Where is she? She's in San Antonio. She doesn't like to go out in public, but the truth of it is that she uses Sunday mornings for crafting with friends. And so that's how she gets connected. But I appreciate it. What are we supposed to do now? I forget all the things that we're
Let's
supposed to.
see, meditation song.
Yeah,
and
we're
then
gonna,
you'll do the
and then
meditation.
we'll do a real meditation, not
Okay.
just the practicing
That's great.
mindfulness.
That's great.
In this moment, in this place, I remember who I am, letting fear and worry fall away. I open my eyes and see there is only love. There is only
I'm going to say some words and I just ask you to repeat the words to yourself. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. So we return to our awareness of this room. Open our awareness to that first choice we have to love. Love ourselves. And so it is. Amen.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. The light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.